You don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look at better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheap again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the fourth part of What If Deku Meets Incredibles. Special note, this fanfic is written in a masterpiece of Yellow Pikmin 88 on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Izuku and Ochako stared up at the condescending face of Syndrome. Given the giant S on his costume, it wasn't difficult for the two to figure out his identity as he hovered over the young heroes. "So you're the villain behind all of this," said Izuku. "The missing heroes, the robot, everything. No autographs?" Syndrome smirked back before touching down. "Though, I have to ask, why would you kids want to be heroes at all? It's really not all that it's cracked up to be. You know, I am in the market for sidekicks. If you think we'd ever join someone like you, think again," Ochako refused. Syndrome shrugged. "Well, I tried." A second later, he picked up a boulder with his ZPE before flinging it at the duo. Smash! Deku, thinking fast, delivered a kick to the oncoming rock which shattered it into pebbles. Syndrome furrowed his brow. "Look out, Deku! Here comes another," Ochako pointed as the villain threw a much larger rock at them. She stared down the attack with a glare. "Two can play at this game. I've got this." The young girl took the lead this time as she ran head-on towards the flying boulder and brushed her fingers across its surface as she slid under it, nullifying its gravity. "Now, Deku," Izuku followed up with another kick. But instead of breaking the boulder, he sent it flying back thanks to Uravity's 0G. Syndrome yelped as he flew out of the way of the makeshift meteor and watched it sail away before dropping upon Ochako's release, the girl roughly swallowing the rising feeling of nausea. "Whoa, that was a pretty awesome counterattack. You two make a good team." Syndrome responded with an excited grin, a reaction the young heroes found confusing. "Here, try this." He followed up his last attack with a barrage of laser bolts from his gauntlets. Izuku and Ochako scattered to avoid the shots before the latter grabbed a nearby tree and used its weightless form to shield herself and Deku from the lasers. "Your turn," she retaliated, hurling the tree like a javelin at Syndrome, who caught it with his ZPE before tossing it away. "Ha ha ha, yes, now this is more like it," he cheered. "This is way more fun than my fight with Incredible was. All he did was flail around and run away. Then again, being a washed-up has-been for 15 years tends to do that to a super. What do you think this is? Some sort of game? We're not putting on a show here," Ochako reacted angrily. "But isn't that what kids do for grown-ups?" Syndrome condescended further, which only irked the heroine further. "Don't let him get to you, Uravity," Deku said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "He's not like the villains we've fought before. There's something odd about the way he fights." "Here we go," Syndrome cackled as he scattered a barrage of grenades towards the duo. Deku moved his right arm into position, his support glove PP back before he flicked his finger, which sent out a shockwave that blew the bombs back at Syndrome, who frantically flew upwards to avoid the explosions. It was then that he saw more rocks coming at him from Uravity, but he had time to freeze them all at once and hurl them back again. The girl dived away to avoid them, whilst Izuku shattered any that were on course to hit them. "He just freezes everything we throw at him with that laser quirk. How do we get the drop on this guy?" Ochako asked. "Drop?" The word she spoke turned the wheels in Izuku's head. "I've got an idea," he said as he ran towards a large structure of rock, pulling Ochako along by the hand, before he delivered a solid kick to it, causing it to break apart into several boulders. "Do you trust me, Uravity?" he asked his friend. She blinked at him for a moment before furrowing her brow and nodding as Izuku pulled her behind the fallen rocks, hiding them from Syndrome's view. "What are they up to?" the villain wondered before he heard Deku's voice. "Let's see you dodge this," he shouted at Syndrome over the boulders before one was suddenly kicked towards him. "This again? It ain't gonna change, kids," he mocked as he effortlessly dodged the boulder and hurled it back as a second boulder flew to intercept it. The destructive game of catch continued for about a minute until Izuku kicked the final boulder at Syndrome. But as it flew past him, the man yawning as he pointed over his shoulder to freeze the large rock, he blinked and shook his head when he saw Ochako had disappeared. What the where'd she go? Syndrome looked at the empty spot next to Deku, before the hairs on the back of his neck stood up when he felt a presence behind him. His head had only just turned to see Gravity, clinging to the frozen boulder he had dodged earlier, before she sprang at him like a certain frog girl, her eyes glazing over as she quickly exhaled. Gunhead martial arts, she said inwardly as her hands latched onto Syndrome's wrists to cross them behind his back, and her knee jammed its way into the lower half of his spine, locking him in a grapple hold and sending the both of them falling out of the sky to the ground. The villain gagged as he felt the wind leave his body when he struck the dirt combined with the added weight of Ochako pinning him under her back-breaker grapple. "Don't move," she said as he instinctively struggled in her grip. "This hold's designed to immobilize larger opponents, so don't think you'll get loose. Trust me. You don't want to resist her when she's fired up like this," Izuku cautioned as he knelt in front of the immobilized Syndrome. "Now tell us how to get off this island." "Even if I did, you'd never be able to stop my Omnidroid." Syndrome resisted. "Once it completes its mission, Supers will never return to America. And with Shigaraki on my side, I can spread my mission to Japan as well and eventually the whole world." "But why? Why would you want to create a world without heroes?" Ochako asked, unable to comprehend the concept. Syndrome only scoffed back. "I wouldn't expect brats like you to understand. They're nothing but condescending glory hogs that look down on everyone cause they think we're weak and worthless. You have no idea what it's like to be told you'll never be good enough, to be rejected by everyone, by your idols. That's why you can never count on them for anything." Izuku froze when he heard those words as he stared at the villain. The look in the man's eyes was one he was all too familiar with. "Sorry, kid, it's not gonna happen." "I'm sorry, Izuku. I wish things were different." "You want to be a hero that badly, Deku? Then why don't you take a swan dive off the roof and maybe you'll get a quirk in your next life?" "Can you be a hero? Not without a quirk." This villain, he was like, You're quirkless too. You wanted to be a hero. You're like," Izuku whispered in bewilderment. But before he could say any more, Syndrome, having managed to twist one of his hands around while Izuku's guard was down, zapped him with his ZPE. "Deku!" Ochako cried out, her grip on Syndrome slackening from the shock which allowed the villain to kick her strong in the gut, followed by a second blow to the back of her head, before he lifted Deku into the air, his face angrier than ever. How could this green-haired pipsqueak kid see through him? He snarled with a burning rage as he began to slam Izuku on every surface he could reach, rattling his brain with each blow, before finally reeling back his arm and flung the boy straight off the cliff. "No!" Ochako immediately jumped straight after her disorientated friend as he plummeted toward the jungle far below. The girl swam through the air as fast as she could towards him, the two reaching out to grab each other's hands before they finally made contact and their gravity vanished, leaving them floating in mid-air, just a few feet above the ground. Ochako let out a great sigh as she released her quirk and they gently landed on the ground unharmed but breathing heavily. "That was close." Ochako breathed as Izuku replied. "Too close. Uraraka, you saved me, thank you." He smiled gratefully at her. "No problem. You'd do the same for me after all." She smiled back. "In a heartbeat." The two chuckled before they glanced down to see their hands still entwined. They quickly let go, blushing slightly, before they heard a laugh from above. "I'll admit it, you rugrats are no pushovers, but I'm done playing around with you," Syndrome said, holding up one of his tiny bomb sticks before hurling it at the cliff side. A tremendous explosion quickly followed. Ochako's scream was cut short as a landslide came crashing down upon the two young heroes before the dust settled, leaving only a large pile of rocks where they used to be. "Well, I won't be seeing them again. Good riddance," Syndrome bitterly concluded before flying off. For a while, the area was silent, except for the occasional sound of the rock pile shifting under its own weight. But then, a bright green glow began to pierce through its many gaps before a tremendous blast blew the rocks away, revealing Izuku and Ochako crouching inside a small man-made cave. In the small window before the rocks landed, The former had used one for all to kick a hole in the base of the cliff before diving inside, taking Ochako with him, just as the rocks hit the ground. I seriously thought we were gonna be crushed. Uravity said, relieved to still be in one piece. I guess we're even now, huh? I guess so. Izuku jauntily replied as he felt his ear. CRP. My earpiece is gone. It must have fallen out. Mine too. Ochako checked her ear until she noticed the smashed remains of their communication devices. Great. Now we can't contact Sue and the others. Then we'll just have to track them down. We better hurry and find everyone while we still have the strength. I don't know how much longer we can keep this fight up. Right. After that narrow escape, I'm bursting with energy. Let's go, Ochako said with newfound moxie, the two taking off into the jungle. Katsuki shook his aching wrist as he stood among the piles of sludge that used to be clones of Mr. Incredible. Kota stood a few feet away, nervously watching the battle, wondering how to assist his classmate. Abaku. Stay out of this, dinosaur. Bakugou cut him off with his hand out. You're not going to be able to beat this guy with rats and birds. I've got this. Twice shook with what could be rage or fear at how easily his incredible clones were defeated by Bakugou. But as he was looking at the explosive hero, a light bulb went off. Okay, Blondie, maybe you can take out a couple of meatheads, but let's just see how you handle yourself. He boldly challenged before he released 2 mounds of sludge which began to reshape themselves. And when their transformation was complete, Bakugou and Kota both stared at the clones, shocked at who exactly they were. What the hell? The former screamed in disbelief as he found himself staring into the familiar red eyes of himself. 2 of them. The pair of Baku clones stared back at their original design, eyes filled with bloodlust and hands crackling with threatening sparks. Good thing I took his measurements when we kidnapped him back then. Now let's see how you like being blown up. I can't watch. Twice covered his face as the Baku clones sprang into action towards Katsuki. Die. Their voices echoed as they unleashed a blast of nitroglycerin at the boy who dove back to avoid it. He wasn't exactly used to being on the receiving end of his explosions for a change. He dodged a blast aimed at his head before countering the attacking clone with a kick to its gut. Diamen, these fakes really do act like me, he cursed inwardly. I already used up one of my grenades on those incredible clones, so I've got to make this count. As he continued to evade his duplicate's assault, he started to bait them closer until they were standing in front of Twice. There's my opening. My turn, he shouted before he pulled the pin on his remaining gauntlet, and the resulting explosion swallowed the clones, obliterating them back into sludge. Twice, caught off by the realization that the attack was aimed at him too, had no time to dodge as the remaining residue of the blast hit him with a wave of flames. Being the furthest away from the attack, it didn't seem to cause any serious damage to the man. Though it did hurt like hell as he singed villain was sent flying back across the plain and crashed into a nearby rock, strong. He immediately flew into a panic as he began to trash about on the ground like a dying fish. Og, no, the pain. I'm gonna disappear. I don't want to disappear. I'm breaking. Something clicked in the deranged man's head. Still here. But if I'm still here then, I can't be a clone. I must be real. I'm the real Twice. I'm real, baby, real. I'm Alieni of Tilda. He cheered as he began to leap about on the spot like a child on Christmas morning. What the FCK is he tripping on? Bakugou muttered, looking at the ecstatic schizophrenic. Twice stopped his eccentric dance as he turned to face Bakugou, a hardened glare on his face. Something had changed inside the villain. He seemed somewhat more composed and focused, a sign that caused Bakugou an air of concern. You're in trouble now, kid. I know who I am now, so I won't fail my friends again, he said, his voice sounding clearer than before after having a major epiphany. 2 replicas of himself then emerged from his body, before another 4 emerged from the clones. Then more, then more, then even more still as Bakugou began to back away, his jaw dropping in shock as he was soon facing down an army of 100 Twices. Holy mother of God damn, this feels right. Now it's time for you to die, punk. I'm taking you alive. Bakugou had to scramble as the angry mob of clones charged at the teen brandishing their razor-edged measuring tapes. SHT, he cursed as he felt one of the tapes lash his right arm, leaving a shallow cut on his bicep. Moments later, 2 more tapes wrapped around his wrists and 3 more around his waist. The clones tugged against their binding weapons in an attempt to hold him down. Bakugou, in turn, pulled back against his bonds to try and pull free, whilst more clones advanced to attack him. "You bstrd can't tie me down with some goddamn ribbon, rah!" With a roar that could be considered human, Bakugou released a blast from each of his hands whilst sharply twisting his body. The blasts added to the centrifugal force which resulted in Katsuki SWNGNG, the clones tied to him like human-shaped wrecking ball which smashed against a dozen of the surrounding clones, splattering them in the process. The boy then fired off another blast to launch himself into the air and raised his hands. "Take this!" He dived back down towards the crowd of clones and hit the ground like a bomb, the catastrophic blast scattering the clones everywhere in a blazing explosion. When the dust settled, Bakugou could be seen breathe in a burning crater, his wrists searing with pain as the kickbacks of his quirk were beginning to catch up with him. "I can do this all day, but..." He grinned through his fatigue. But his smile quickly fell when he saw a few clones emerging from the smog, who then began to create more clones until the army had completely replenished its lost ranks. Bakugou felt a bead of fearful sweat trickle down his brow. "So can we, kid. We can do it all week. Gimme a DMN break," the clones said collectively, and once again stampeded towards Bakugou, who was steadily growing more fatigued. He fired blasts in all directions, destroying as many clones as he could. But for every one he struck down, 2 more showed up in its place. As he desperately tried to hold back the horde of attackers, Koda was panicking from afar as he watched. "What do I do? I have to help Bakugou, but there aren't any animals here that can fight an army," he thought helplessly as the clones began to overwhelm Katsuki, kicking and punching him from every angle. "At this rate, he's going to run out of energy. There has to be a way to beat this guy." But just then, he felt something scratch at his trouser leg. He looked down to see a rat sitting by his feet. The rodent stared up at the animal tamer, who turned his head towards the clone army and then back to the rat until his eyes widened in realization. "That's it. Bring as many of your friends as you can find, and hurry," he whispered to the rat, which quickly scurried off while Koda looked back to the fight. "Just hang on a little more, Bakugou." "Damn it!" the aforementioned boy screamed, who was now close to his breaking point, his hands burning with pain from the chain of explosions he'd been forced to use on the never-ending army. "We've got him now, boys. Time to finish him off," one of the clones yelled to his copied comrades as they prepared to unleash a final beatdown on Bakugou, certain to render him unconscious, and likely with several broken bones. But then, a sharp squeak was heard a few feet away from the battle. The clones looked up and saw Koda, standing amongst a plague of rats, their beady eyes staring into the crowd of twices. "You know what to do," Koda spoke before pointing at the villains. Immediately, the rats swarmed the clone army. The men naturally began to panic as the tiny critters began scrambling up their bodies, drawing their attention away from Bakugou and allowing Koda to pull him to safety. "What are they doing? That won't keep them distracted for long," he said to the tamer. "Just wait. I need you ready to end it," Koda replied as the rats began to examine the panicking clones by smelling them before they began to bite and tear at their throats, causing the fakes to dissolve from the small but deadly injuries. The terrifying assault went on a few moments until the rats began to gather around a certain twice until they almost covered his entire screaming body. "That's him. He's the real twice," Koda pointed Bakugou to the fidgeting villain as he tried to swat off the vermin that were scrambling over his body. The explosive hero's eyes flashed as he licked his grinning lips. "Guess I was wrong, dinosaur. Rats can beat this guy, and I'm the exterminator." He then blasted himself into the air before he began to descend towards the real twice. "Everyone get clear," Koda called out to his rodent minions, who quickly scattered, leaving a confused twice alone long enough to look up at the 5'7" stick of a dynamite heading straight for him. "Howitzer impact," Katsuki roared as he unleashed a tremendous explosion at the villain, the schizophrenic man flying out of the cloud of smoke like a screaming bullet before landing in the seawater. The damage from the blast to the original twice caused many of the weakened clones to dissolve. The few remaining clones stared out at the cove, worrying for their creator until Koda suddenly spoke up. "You'd better go and help him. He's not alone in there." "What do you mean?" one of the clones asked just as a familiar scream sounded from underwater before Twice sprang up from the surface flailing his legs. "Guys, help me," he squealed as a giant shark burst out of the water, snapping its massive jaws at the villain who began to swim away from it in a blind panic. "Boss!" the clones cried collectively as they began to jump into the water and swim after the shark, which in turn swam after Twice. As he watched them go, Bakugou burst out laughing at the comedic spectacle. "Diamant, dinosaur. I didn't think you could be that vicious." He grinned sadistically. Don't worry. I told her not to eat him. She's just giving him a scare." It's hilarious either way. It could only be funnier if it was a crocodile chasing him. So where do we go from here? Do we head for the facility or find the rest of our group? Well, with how spread out we already are, the villain will try and pick us off like they did at the training camp. Bakugou wagered. Probably best we find the extras here before they get themselves caught. I guess that's the closest he'll ever come to saying let's go help our friends. Knowing him, Koda figured just as Katsuki began to run back the way they came. "Well, don't just stand there, dinosaur, let's go." Right, I'm coming." Outside the facility, Shoto, Momo, Gyro and Kaminari were facing off against Dabai. After the initial confrontation he and Spinner had with the group, Shoto tried to cut them off with another ice wall. But at the same time he'd had to dodge an incoming attack from the flame villain, which caused his ice structure to veer off at angle. This resulted in him trapping himself along with Momo, Gyro and Kaminari on one side and Spinner with the rest of the group. "Get to the air hangar, we need that escape jet, we'll find the others," Momo had ordered before the four of them ran out into the jungle with Dabai in a literal hot pursuit. He'd been chasing them for a few minutes now, leaving a trail of burning trees in his wake. Shoto had blocked his attacks as best he could with his ice, but hadn't been able to land a single blow on Dabai in return. He breathed heavily as he started to feel the drawback of his quirk being overused as Momo spoke to him. "You can't keep this up forever, Todoroki. At this rate he's going to wear down your defenses." "Do you have a plan?" the dual wielder asked back as Momo tried to think of a solution until she spotted a waterfall just off in the distance. It looked vaguely familiar. Yes, that's it. As she began calculating her strategy, Dabai prepared to launch his next attack. "That way," Momo pointed to the falls as she led her friends in the direction, Shoto blocking Dabai's flames once again, the villain groaning as he did. "Is running all you plan to do? You're really starting to bore me," he said. "So what's the plan?" Kaminari asked as they ran. "We need to draw his attention away to create an opening for a counterattack." "But how do we distract him?" "You could pull your jamming face in front of him," Gyro suggested with a chuckle. "Not funny, why don't you jam your jacks up his butt? That'll get his attention." The wheels in Momo's head spun as she focused on the bickering pair. "That could work," she muttered to herself. "I am not sticking my..." No, I mean you can create a diversion. Listen." Momo began to relay her plan to the others as they reached the cove, the waterfall standing before them. "Here he comes," Creati said as Dabai casually entered the clearing himself, the plants around him turning to cinders as his flames ceased. His eyes turned to Momo, Gyro and Kaminari, a disinterested look on his face. "I couldn't care less about you three, so I'll kill you last." He drawled passively to the three as he faced Shoto with a vicious grin. "But you, Shototodoroki, are one I've wanted to kill the most. Let's see if you're as big a disgrace as your BSTRD of a father." Shoto chose not to acknowledge the man's taunt, but instead summoned his own elements to hand. "Don't disregard my comrades, Dabai. That's a mistake you'll regret." With those words of resistance, the villain attacked with a blast of fire, Shoto countering with a wall of ice. The two attacks collided at first, but after a few seconds the flames began to rapidly eat away at the ice, clouds of steam billowing throughout the jungle in the process. As Shoto tried to hold off his opponent, Momo motioned to Kaminari and Gyro. The trio, using the steam for cover, began to put their side of strategy into play, while Shoto sent a trail of ice across the ground, hoping to trap Dabai by his feet. The villain countered by leaping into the air and landing back down on one of the icicles before he returned fire. The blue fire licked its way over the ice toward Shoto, who tried blocking them with another shield of ice. He hissed painfully as he felt the first sign he was developing frostbite. My flames aren't as powerful as his, but I can't keep using my ice this frequently, or else I'll risk frostbite, he thought as he shot back with his own fire. Dabai countered as the orange flames met his own azure ones, the two attacks pushing against one another. But as they continued, the blue began to overwhelm the orange, smothering it as it crept closer to engulf Shoto, who gritted his teeth as he tried to push back. Dabai grinned wickedly as he gave his flames an extra move with his hands, bringing them closer to burning his foe, who was now forced into a crouch and barely holding him back as the flames started to burn his skin. "Back off!" a female voice shouted out. Dabai was suddenly forced back by Momo, who was wearing a cape made from a familiar silver material and wielding a bow staff. The man tried to burn her only for her to swat at his hands with her staff whenever he began to raise them. "Trying to keep me from using my flames, huh? Pretty clever tactic, but not enough," he thought before he chose to shoot his fire at the ground instead. The grass was carpeted with blue flames which forced Creati to stagger back, giving Dabai the opening he needed. He released another shot of fire at the girl who covered herself with her cape as the attack struck. "Yayurazu!" Todoroki shouted as she was blasted back across the clearing, her flame-retardant cape already burnt to cinders along with patches of her exposed skin. But as she fell to the ground she cried out, "Now, earphone jack!" A deafening sound struck the villain from behind, causing him to clutch his head. He looked back to see the steam cleared away by a giant speaker PND the air with its shockwaves, and standing next to it was Kyoka, her jacks plugged into it and wearing a set of headphones. "Need me to turn it up louder?" she shouted as Dabai struggled to raise his hand, preparing to blast the speaker with his flames, before something shot past his head towards the waterfall. "Hey, barbecue! I wonder how much more burnt you'll be after I electrocute your butt," Kaminari taunted as he pointed his finger at Dabai and unleashed a thunderous shot of electricity. Dabai's eyes widened as the bolt shot towards him, only for it to narrowly miss zapping him between the eyes and hit the waterfall behind him instead. He looked back at where it had struck for a moment before turning his gaze back to Chargebolt, who grinned awkwardly. "OSHT. New plan, I'm killing you three first. Starting with her." Dabai snarled as he fought through the shockwaves and fired at Earphone Jack, who hadn't disconnected from the speaker yet. "Gyro!" Kaminari ran to pull her away just as the fire struck the speaker, causing it to explode. "Guys!" Shoto cried out as the smoke cleared to show Kaminari and Gyro on the ground, the former shielding the latter with his now singed body before he collapsed on the ground. "Kaminari!" Gyro shouted as she rolled him over to check his injuries. "You DMN idiot, why'd you have to go and shield me?" her voice cracking as she tried to wake him. Dabai made a sickly smile at his handiwork as he turned back to face Shoto, who tried to attack him with more ice, but too slow as Dabai shot him with another blast of fire which knocked him to the ground. The villain drew closer as he prepared to finish Shoto off, grabbing him by the throat and lifting him off the ground. "How disappointing," he said, watching the dual-haired boy choke under his grip as he conjured his flames into his other hand. "I was hoping you'd have improved from the last time, but you're still weak." Todoroki gagged with pain as he felt his opponent's hand heating up against his neck, but managed to speak through it. "I may not be strong enough yet to fight you one-on-one, but you forget, I'm not fighting alone." Dabai flinched slightly when he felt several small objects hit him in the back. He looked back to see Kaminari behind him. The blonde was breathed with singes across his body from the villain's attack, his disc launcher pointed at him. "Good acting, huh?" he said with a grin. "Was that supposed to hurt?" Dabai asked sarcastically, to which the electric hero grinned despite the pain from his burns. "No. But this will," Kaminari replied as he grabbed a nearby wire and released his electricity into it. Dabai's gaze followed the wire until it ended at what looked like a sound cannon being aimed by Momo, and with Gyro was standing with her jacks plugged in as Kaminari's electricity powered up the weapon. "Rock and roll, but," she said, flipping him off as the sound cannon unleashed a cacophonous sonic blast, much more powerful than the speaker, which pushed Dabai back towards the waterfall, the villain dropping Shoto in the process, who covered his ears. He tried to hang onto the ground and raise his hand in an attempt to destroy the cannon. But before he could, Dabai felt a sudden sharp pull on his back, as he was ripped him away from the ground by an invisible force. The villain found himself flying through the air towards the waterfall until he struck something strong which knocked the wind out of him, the heavy water crashing down around his head and shoulders. "What the hell?" he questioned as he hung suspended in the middle of the falls until he felt something metal behind his back. The shuttle rail, but how did they know part of it was hidden here? The Omnidroid plot wasn't the only information we found on Syndrome's computer. Momo limped forward with a smirk on her face. Gyro stood beside her, holding Kaminari up with his arm around her shoulders. And thanks to jamming Wei's feint attack earlier on the rail and his killer aim with those super strong electromagnet tags Momo gave him, you're right where we want you to be. Just as she planned. Shoto added as he went to join them as well, throwing a proud smile at Momo who returned it in full. Despite the awkward position he was now in, Dabai grinned at them. Very impressive, girl. I never imagined you'd pull off such a complex strategy. But even water can't keep my flames doused for long, he said as his blue flames started to reignite in short sputtering bursts, causing plumes of steam to form in the waterfall. You really do underestimate us, don't you, Chargrill? Kaminari laughed as he slowly raised his hand and pointed at the suspended Dabai. But one thing you ought to know about our vice rep is that her plans have more than one phase. The realization hit Dabai as quick as the bolt of lightning Kaminari shot at him. The villain screamed in agony as the waterfall conducted Chargebolt's electric attack, magnifying it across both the water and the hidden rails. Shoto then finished up their combined counterattack by unleashing a burst of ice at the falls, encasing it along with Dabai in a frozen prison, the villain now unconscious from the shock. We did it. Momo breathed a sigh of relief as the fatigue finally caught up with her, though Shoto was quick to catch her before she could collapse, holding her up the same way Gyro was with Kaminari. We didn't kill him, did we? The earphone hero asked with reluctant concern. No, I froze him before the electrocution could stop his heart, and I left holes in the ice for him to breathe. He'll have a terrible cold when he wakes up, but knowing his intense heat, he'll thaw out before he gets frostbite. Shoto reassured. Then I guess I don't need to worry about being a murderer. Kaminari chuckled dryly. Never mind it now. We need to catch up with the others and get out of here fast if we're going to stop the Omnidroid. Momo reiterated. Don't need to tell me twice. Yeah, Momo. Let's go. Gyro agreed before the four of them went in search of their peers. Not bad, little brother Dabai thought from within his icy prison, a tiny crack beginning to form on its surface. It was chaos on the battlefield since the red and pink duo had crossed paths with Illusion and his squadron of troops. The man himself was surprisingly nowhere to be seen, as not long after the battle had commenced he'd somehow managed to disappear during the fight, leaving his subordinates to the two young heroes in training. His squad of 6 brawlers had steadily dwindled to 2 with the unconscious and variously injured bodies of the other guards littering the ground. Now that they'd witnessed the weapons this caliber of goons had at their disposal, the red and pink duo had been able to formulate a tag team strategy around the flamethrowers, taser gloves, grappling hooks, and sticky bombs. Ashido, incoming! Kirishima yelled out as he threw himself in front of a barrage of bullets from one of the remaining brawler guards that were headed for Mina, who had been focused on battling the other brawler by melting his gauntlets with her acid. Thanks, Kirishima, Pinky thanked him, throwing a glob of acid into the brawler's visor, which caused the digital retina to malfunction and the helmet to begin melting. The man instinctively panicked as he hurried to remove his visor, which left him open for Mina to go in for a second attack. Take that, she cracked his lower jaw with a fierce uppercut, toppling the brute to the ground. Incoming, she skated in to finish him off while he was down with a follow-up kick to the head, which both knocked away his dissolving helmet before it could effectively merge with his face and knocked him out cold. Nice one, Pinky, Red Riot praised whilst fighting the last brawler who tried to snag him with his grappling hooks. The strong cables shot towards Kirishima like writhing metal snakes, the young man back flipping to avoid their strike before he slammed his fists down on one of the hooks, embedding it deep in the ground. The brawler grunted as he found himself struggling to pull the cable back up from the ground as Kirishima continued to tie him down, P&D the other cables into the ground like tent pegs until he'd immobilized the man and began to charge toward him. You shouldn't have underestimated us kids, He grinned as the flustered brawler unloaded the last of his bullets upon the hero, which pathetically bounced off his hardened skin, until he threw himself at the guard, grabbing him by the shoulders and slamming his head against his, which shattered his helmet like glass, and the man was rendered unconscious on his feet thanks to the cables holding him up, a trickle of BLD oozing from his forehead and nose. "Yeah, Team Red and Pink for the win," Mina cheered, her hand raised for a high five, which her fellow Horn buddy happily returned. Their momentary victory was short-lived, however, as it was interrupted by the sound of a slow clapping. The two students stayed on guard as they heard Illusion's voice coming from the mechanical birds all around them. "Impressive work. For that many of my men to be taken down by a couple super brats is nothing to scoff at. Of course, it won't be enough to defeat me. Then why don't you prove it by getting out here and fighting? Leaving your flunkies to do all the fighting while you run off and hide is the farthest thing from manly," Ijiro stated. "Manliness is overrated." Kirishima felt a vein pop on his temple. "You take that back." "Calm down, Red Riot. Don't let him get to you." Pinky interjected, her hand on his shoulder before she spoke back to their hidden enemy. "Why do you want to work for this syndrome guy? He's a murderer, and he's going to use that robot to destroy a whole city full of people. Shows how little you know of his true plan. I wouldn't expect your kind to understand. The sacrifices he's made will be worth it in the long run, for the sake of creating a new and better world for humanity, and especially for the quirkless, with no further need of the hero menace ruining our lives." Menace? This world was in chaos until heroes brought it back under control, Kirishima proclaimed, hearing Illusion scoff in response. "You're probably too stupid to know it. But before you so-called heroes came along, we quirkless had our own ways of being heroes. Respected ways, at that. Soldiers, firefighters, detectives. But now, because of you, we're treated like trash, like we're good for nothing." "What are you talking about? We don't treat people that way," Kirishima denied. Illusion scoffed in response. "No, you naive boy, that's exactly how you treat us. Just ask my old man." "What?" Kirishima questioned as Illusion's gaze drifted in thought, his hand gripping his weapon tightly. "My dad was a cop. One of the greatest I'd ever known. To me, he was the world's greatest hero. He helped so many in need, except for when you quirk users would steal the spotlight from him. But he put up with it, until one day. He'd been investigating a kidnapping and had found out where the victim was being held. When he arrived on the scene, he discovered a quirk user was the kidnapper. That's when the pros decided to get involved." The man spat sourly. "My old man may have been quirkless, but he wasn't weak. He'd fought his way to victory even when he was outnumbered. But the pros didn't care. All they saw him as was a nuisance. Stay back, they said. Let the real heroes handle this." But Dad was putting his foot down this time. He was not about to let all his strong work and his duty as a cop get stepped on by these sideshow freaks. So he snuck in, outran the pros, and found the victim at the villain's mercy. "So then, what happened?" Mina couldn't help her curiosity as Illusion replied. "It was a tense standoff between the two, but Dad was quicker. He drew his gun and shot the villain in the knee. He told the victim to run when he did, but as they were, the villain tried to go after them with an attack. Dad threw himself between them and got injured in the process, saving the victim's life. Then the heroes finally caught up and took the villain out. The case was closed after that. But do you know what happened to my old man?" Illusion didn't wait for the young heroes to even shake their heads. "He got suspended for interference. He put his life on the line and saved someone. But the authorities treated him like he did something wrong. Those pompous heroes laughed him out of the station." The man's voice started shaking as his anger and frustration grew. "That was the start of my father's downfall. After he was humiliated, he fell into a depression, hit the bottle strong, and eventually lost his job entirely. And the last time I saw him, he was getting behind the wheel before he'd sobered up." The young heroes felt their BLD run cold at the implication. "Don't you get it? No matter how much we quirkless try, no matter how strong we work or what we sacrifice, you make us look like a FCK joke, like we're the freaks. You make it impossible for us to be heroes like we used to be, all the while you show off your little quirks like it's some stupid action movie from the 2010s. That's why I joined Syndrome, because when he succeeds, quirkless people will never, ever be looked down on again. And with Shigaraki on our side now, your precious hero society will crumble. And then I'll be the one laughing all of you out of your jobs so that my old man can finally rest in peace. The two heroes were shocked by the man's revelation, to say the least. They'd heard and occasionally seen the prejudice many quirk users, including heroes, had against the quirkless population, and it disgusted them to no ends. But to think that it had sent this man down the path of villainy by ruining his father's career, it was a tragedy in every sense of the word. "Demon, I'm sore," but before either he could offer his words of sympathy, Kirishima was suddenly struck from behind, 2 sets of metal prongs stabbing into his back, soon followed by an agonizing jolt of electricity coursing through his nerves. "Jaya Akage," the sturdy hero screamed from the pain as he fell to his knees from the shock. A flickering of light danced behind him, revealing Illusion standing over him, his newly displayed camouflage feature powering off from his bodysuit and helmet. "And I'll start by killing the 2 of you. You're not even worth being lab rats for Syndrome," he threatened as he prepared to go in for a second attack on the downed Kirishima, until a pink-skinned fist struck him from below, directly in the gut, as Mina skated into action on her acid-spraying boots. "You BSTRD. You can't strike someone in the back when they're trying to sympathize with you," she yelled. "Didn't ask for his pity, don't need it," Illusion replied before he reactivated his camouflage. "Son of a beach," Kirishima cursed as he got to his feet. "That's it, I'm not giving this guy any mercy after that." "Me neither. This dude's out for BLD, so it's pointless negotiating," Mina agreed as the 2 of them looked around, waiting for any sign of his next attack. "That camo suit is gonna be a real problem though," she added. "No kidding. We gotta find some way to disable it or keep him from reactivating it." Mina thought for a moment after Kirishima's reply before she smiled. "I think I have an idea. Harden your body, this is gonna sting." "Huh? What are you?" Red Riot didn't get a chance to question her before Pinky raised her hands to the sky and sprayed a shower of acid straight upward. "Acid Rain," she named the attack as the corrosive downpour fell around them and the surrounding area. Kirishima hissed as he felt the droplets nip at his hardened skin, but through the acid rain, the pair spotted a figure glitching in and out of their view. Red Riot knew he couldn't give the man a chance to notice they'd caught on, so he immediately charged at the villain, who was indeed startled when he realized his camouflage had been disabled. "SHT!" he cursed just as Kirishima threw a punch at him, the man raising his tonfas to block the strike. "Hide and seek's over, bub." His adversary grinned before move his other hand into Illusion's chest and ripping off a chunk of his suit with his claws, causing the camouflage to stop altogether. "DMNU," he spat back as he holstered one of his tonfas to reach for his belt and pull out a gun to shoot Kirishima between the eyes. The point-blank plasma sent the sturdy hero stumbling back, giving Illusion time to activate his jetpack and launch into the air. But he didn't stop there as he stretched out his hand and fired a cable from his wrist, which wrapped itself around Kirishima's neck before lifting him clean off the ground. The young man naturally began choking from the sudden hanging before he quickly reactivated his hardening to alleviate the pressure on his throat, but he was still dangling like a puppet as Illusion began flying them in circles. "You can't keep this strong form up for long," he taunted the hero. "My jets can run for hours and you'll be Blue Riot long before their fuel cells go dry. And don't think I've forgotten about your little pink girlfriend." He looked down at Mina, who was looking up at the scene in horror. "There's no way she'll spray me with her acid unless she wants to risk melting your face off. Or how about I fly higher? See if that body of yours can survive a 500-foot drop. So how do you choose to die, hero? Hanging? Burning? Or just smashed into pieces?" "None of the above," Kirishima hacked as he tried to maintain his hardening. "One thing you should know about us FANFIC students, as that we're more crazy and unpredictable than you villains can possibly imagine. Ashido." Illusion looked down to see Mina, who had formed a large ball of acid a meter wide between her hands. "Embrace my acid," she said with a crazed grin before hurling the ball towards Illusion. He tried to fly to avoid the attack, but found his flight slowed by Kirishima, who was tugging aggressively on the cable to stop his momentum. All the man could do was scream as the acid ball splattered across the both of them, dissolving the cable and damaging his jetpack, sending the two spiraling back down as Kirishima grabbed onto him and tackled him against the ground. burying his fist into the jetpack to permanently ground the villain. "Now it's my turn," he roared as he began to wail on Illusion with his fists, striking him back and forth across the face before cracking a patch of his helmet to reveal one of his hate-filled eyes. The man blocked the next punch to strike back, knocking Kirishima off his chest as he went for his tonfa, only for it to be hit with a glob of acid from Pinky, causing it to melt and break in two. Red Gauntlet, Kirishima went in for the final blow as he struck Illusion directly in the face and completely shattering his visor. As the quirkless villain was sent flying over a sloping cliff off the side of the clearing though, he shot out a second cable from his other wrist, which snared itself around Mina's waist. "Oh, crud." She barely had time to mutter as the weight of Illusion's body pulled her after him down the slope. "Mina!" Ijiro jumped after her as the three figures were now sliding down the steep slope towards the long drop at the edge of it. Illusion was the first to act as he grabbed his remaining tonfa and activated its bladed form, which he then used to try and dig into the slope. Sparks flew as the weapon dragged against the rock, slowing Illusion's descent whilst Mina continued to slide past him, until the blade eventually managed to snag and stop the villain's movement. Unfortunately for Pinky, by that point she'd slid over the edge of the cliff, despite her attempts to grab onto something, and was now hanging suspended from the cliff by the cable around her torso, the ground now hundreds of feet below her. Her breath hitched in her haste to regain composure as she began to try and pull herself up the cable, but struggled with how slippery it was. This combined with her added weight to it was beginning to drag Illusion towards the edge himself. But as the man tried to keep himself from falling, Kirishima skidded past him, dragging one of his hardened hands against the cliffside to slow his speed. "Ashido!" he shouted as he managed to stop himself at the edge and look down to where Mina was hanging. "Kirishima!" she called out to him. "Just hang on, I'll pull you up," he said, digging his feet into the rock as he grabbed onto the cable and grunted as he began to pull Mina back up towards the edge. Illusion, watching, saw his chance to kill two birds with one stone. He shifted his right arm towards his hand, being careful not to let go of his tonfa, reaching out his finger to the button on his wrist that would release the cable. Kirishima, who had managed to hoist Mina halfway up by this point, noticed what he was about to do. "No, don't do it." "I win, heroes." Illusion snarled as he pressed the button and fell backwards as the cable snapped away from his wrist. The sudden change in weight caused Mina to fall back down and in turn pull Kirishima over the edge with her. The two kids screamed as they fell towards the strong ground far beneath them. Kirishima, now only knowing of one thing left to do, used the cable to pull himself over to Mina and wrapped his arms tightly around his friend. He then hardened his body as much as he could before turning his back to face the ground. "Kirishima!" Mina cried out. "Don't look. Just close your eyes, hang on to me and brace yourself. I'm 1A's unbreakable shield," Red Riot declared. Illusion peered over the edge moments before the two heroes hit the ground with a mighty crash, sending a cloud of dust up into the air. Certain of their death, the villain turned around and began to crawl his way back up the slope. Little did he know, however, that when the dust settled it revealed Mina and Kirishima both still in one piece among the cracked and broken ground. The former groaned as she opened her eyes and hissed at the sudden pains she felt in her back caused by both the cable and Kirishima's rock-strong grip. She hurriedly looked down as she remembered her savior and gasped with shock when she saw him, still in his unbreakable form, but unmoving and badly cracked in places. "Oh no, no. Kirishima!" She hurriedly felt for a pulse though with his skin still hardened it proved difficult to feel through his neck or wrists. And to make matters worse he wasn't breathing. "Wake up! Red Riot can't go out like this. Breathe." She began to PND her fists against his chest to attempt compressions, tears beginning to prick her eyes as he fear for the worst grew. "You can't give up. You still haven't told the others the truth about your hair. I'm not letting you quit. Damn it, I need my horn buddy." With one last mighty hit she heard a gasp and removed her hands to see him coughing, which then slowly turned into a laugh as one of his eyes cracked open. "Looks like that fight with that Yakuza guy really did toughen me up. 300 feet's my new record for highest drop," he said as his body changed back to normal, spattered with bruises but seemingly unbroken. "You pointy jerk," Mina yelled as she slapped his chest. "You scared me half to death." Hey, I may be alive, but I'm still tender, woman. Well, see, can you move? She asked, wondering whether or not to pull him up. Yeah, just gonna need a day's sleep and a new body, he replied. She rolled her eyes. Okay, you big lug, grab a hold. She smiled, offering him her hand to pull him to his feet and sling him over her shoulder. Whoa, when'd you get so good at heavy lifting? He said, surprised by her strength. Hey, you can't exactly be a pro breakdancer without a strong figure. My core's harder than you are, horn buddy, she explained as she began to carry him. Thank you. I'd be a pink pancake if you hadn't broken my fall. You saved my life. Hey, I'd do it again anytime, he replied bashfully. And you saved mine too. I'd have been choked out if you didn't knock that psycho out of the sky. Plus you have me the opening I needed with that acid rain move, though it did sting like hell. It'll only make you stronger. We should totally train together. Our quirks push each other like when you trained with Ojiro. Yeah, you're right, Kirishima agreed casually, all but forgetting the position he was in for their conversation as he pressed his earbud. Hey, Bakugou, are you there? Weird hair? Where the hell are you? Glad to hear you're still alive too. Me and Ashido are trying to regroup with the others. I think we're a mile south of where we got ambushed by the villains. Where are you? Me and Dinosaur just took out one of the league. Head west towards the coast and move it. Sure thing, boss, Kirishima replied sarcastically before hanging up. We have our heading, Pinky. Good to know, though would it kill him to sound a little relieved we're okay? Ah, you know how he is? He probably didn't think we'd be in trouble, so why act concerned? You always have an answer for him, don't you? Then again, you've always been good at reading people you're friends with. Gee, tell me how you really feel, Dancing Queen. Oh shush, or I'll drop you. No, you won't. He felt himself slip from her grasp. Okay, I'll shut up and sleep. Good, 'cause you need it, hardhead. Mina smirked as she kept moving. He's such a goof, but that's what I like about him. Back inside the facility, the remaining members of the infiltration team consisting of Tsu, Toru, Shiro, Shoji, Takoyami, Mainta, Aoyama, and Sato were running down the hallway in the direction of the air hangar with an angry spinner trailing behind them. Stop scurrying around, damn it, he cursed with his sword waving above his head. Wait, Mainta shouted, making the heroes stop, as did Spinner. Why are we running from this guy? There's 8 of us. Half of us fight long range, and all he's got is a sword. Yeah, he's right. We can take this lizard down no problem, Shiro agreed. It's Spinner, you brats, and don't underestimate me, the villain yelled as he lunged towards the group, narrowly avoiding a blast from Aoyama's laser before his sword clashed with Dark Shadow's claws. He stood his ground against the living shadow before a bright light flashed in front of him, forcing his eyes to close and his grip to loosen on his sword, which was suddenly yanked out of his hands by Tsu's tongue. This left him open to being slugged in the face by a combined attack from Sato and Shoji, which sent him falling to the ground, onto the awaiting bed of sticky ball planted by Mainta, before finally having his torso wrapped up by a roll of tape, courtesy of Shiro. Spinner looked up from his sticky prison at his opponents as they stared down at him. Mainta placed his foot on the stunned villain's chest, a SHT-eating grin on his face. That's what you get for messing with 1A, lizard, he bragged. Yeah, that was too easy. We totally creamed him, Toru noted. Shoji folded his arms. Well, 8-on-1 isn't exactly an even fight. Talk about overkill, Sato muttered in agreement. Kinda disappointing, honestly, ribbit, Tsu croaked. But their underwhelming victory was cut as a sinister laugh was heard from Spinner, who sneered at the children. You think that's it? You think you've won? You don't make the plans, I do. What are you talking about? Takoyami questioned. You wanted to get to the air hangar, didn't you? Well, go ahead, check it out, he taunted them. Come on, we have to hurry, Shoji ushered to group as ran on towards the air hangar, Sato carrying Spinner over his shoulder. But when they arrived, they were shocked to find the place completely empty, not a single jet or hovercraft in sight. What's going on? This place was full of vehicles not long ago, Sato recalled as he dropped Spinner, the lizard man grunting as he hit the ground before he snickered at the kids and explained. I just needed to keep you distracted long enough. The young heroes froze when they heard a malevolent chuckle from above them and slowly looked up. Mr. Compress stood on the balcony of the hangar before the group, a clutch of marbles being tossed in his hand. "Well done, Spinner. Your plan worked perfectly." The sinister magician congratulated his comrade as Spinner managed to roll away from the heroes while their attention was on Compress. "You children seem very gung-ho on commandeering these vehicles. Well, if you want the jets, then why don't you just take them?" Before the heroes could respond, the man flicked one of the marbles towards them before it expanded into a full-size jet, its enormous shadow bearing down on the kids. Zero was the first to respond. "Look out!" They barely had time to dodge as the jet crashed into the ground, rolling across the hangar before it hit the wall, now a useless pile of scrap metal. "How about this one?" Compress taunted as he threw a second jet at the students who scattered to avoid it. "Watch it, Compress. You're gonna squash me too," Spinner yelled, who was now crawling on the ground like a caterpillar while the mad magician continued to hurl the compressed vehicles and laughing at the panicking young heroes. The chaos continued for a minute or two until Compress finally ran out of ammo and the hangar was filled with flaming wreckage. "Man, you're AMSCK," Minta taunted as neither he or his classmates had gotten a scratch on them. "And you're all out of jets." "Who said I was aiming for you?" Compress queried as the students looked back in confusion. "Just look around. You're completely enclosed." They soon realized, much to their horror, that the smashed jets had formed a wall of scrap around their group, trapping them in. "Syndrome intends to use you as test subjects, so we could only kill you if you proved too much of a challenge. But honestly, I prefer more to catch my prey alive. There's nothing quite like seeing a helpless target with no way out." "Indeed." A new voice spoke as Kurogiri warped into the hangar before conjuring two more warp gates, which a pair of Namu then stepped through and stood atop the wreckage, surrounding the children with hungry looks on their drooling maws. "Excellent work, Mr. Compress." "Oh, I can't take credit. It was all Spinner's idea." The magician insisted. "He may be the weakest, but he does have his strengths." "Thanks," the lizard man responded, unsure if that was a compliment or not. All the while the 8 students were glaring at the villains, angered at how the tables had been turned in their defeat. "Mr. Aizawa's gonna kill us before they do, ribbit." Sue groaned as they raised their hands in surrender. But just as the guards were about to advance, a familiar pair of arms stretched down from above, along with strands of equally familiar fabric which wrapped around the kids and hoisted them up to the rafters, to the shock of the villains. "Not yet, Asui," the aforementioned teacher said. "Mr. Aizawa!" the students cheered at his arrival. "Do it now, Bob!" Helen shouted as Mr. Incredible made his entrance into the hangar carrying a crate of fuel tanks over his shoulders. "Eat this, you Frankenstein wannabes!" he yelled as he hurled the canisters towards the circle of flaming wrecks the villains were standing on. "Oh FCK," Spinner cursed as Kurogiri hurriedly sprang to warp both him and Compress away before the tanks exploded, engulfing the Namu in flames. The other heroes watched from above before the adults began to descend with the students in tow when the villains were gone. "I'm going to need a hot bath and sleep like the dead after all this is over." Aizawa groaned as he set down Toru, Aoyama, Shoji, and Sato. "Tell me they don't usually get in this amount of danger." Elastigirl asked worriedly, who had her arms wrapped around the pairs of Shiro and Takoyami and Sue and Minta, the latter drooling from being caught between the two females. "I am lovin' this Tilda," he murmured, which didn't go unnoticed by Tsu. "Memo to me, strangle Minta in his sleep, ribbit." Sue croaked with revulsion. "DMN, look at this mess." Shiro stared at the piles of burning scrap metal that were once aircraft. "What are we going to escape in now? That psycho Houdini smashed every jet in the hangar." "No, they wouldn't destroy all of them. They'd be stranding themselves if they did," Bob estimated. "There's gotta be another hangar in the facility." "We'll get to it afterwards. We need to find our kids and the rest of Izuku's friends first," Helen insisted. "Wait, how do you know Midoriya?" Minta asked. A mischievous spark danced in Sue's eye when she heard. "Well, you've always noticed how easy Midoriya gets along with us ladies compared to you, right?" She grinned wickedly before hopping after the adults alongside her classmates, leaving the grape hero alone with his disturbing thoughts. "Midoriya? And Elastigirl? His lecherous mind began playing several mental pictures before his eyes, which began to turn red with rage, eyes leaking tears of BLD. "Over my dead body," he screeched as he hurried to catch up with the others. As they ran, Helen took the opportunity to pick up where she left off with her husband, explaining himself. "So all of this was over some dream job offer. I should have told you I got fired, I admit it. But I just didn't want to worry you." "You didn't want me to worry? And now we're running for our lives through a god-forsaken jungle on top of the fact your new boss and his friends are playing Battle Royale with a bunch of super kids. It's moments like this I'm glad I'm not married," Aizawa grumbled under his breath. "Hey, you keep trying to pick a fight, but I'm just happy you're alive. And hey, at least it's good to see Izuku made it. Always knew the little guy had it in him." "Well, I hope he's safe. The kids even more so. I can't bear the thought of them having to fight for their lives." Helen worried. And she was right to be worried, as back at the site where the children had scattered, Toga hadn't moved from the area. Her crazed, yellow eyes shifted this way and that, her grin ever present as she licked her lips. "I know you're still here, invisible friend Tilda," she said in sing-song, as a branch floated off the ground and headed towards her from behind, ready to strike. But as it swung towards her head, the teen killer turned to block the attack with one of her knives. The sudden counter caused Violet to drop her invisibility, her face filled with fear, which made Toga cackle gleefully. "I could smell you," she lashed out with her other blade, which Violet dodged to avoid being stabbed in the chest, but not enough to avoid getting cut on her arm. She cried out from the pain and dropped her weapon before Toga delivered a sweeping kick to her legs, knocking her to the ground. The girl was slightly disoriented from the fall, but quickly regained her senses as Toga landed on top of her, pinning her down, the two of them nose to nose. "Your name's Violet, right? And Izuku called your daddy Uncle Bob, didn't he? Are you like a cousin to him? Or a sister perhaps? I guess that'll make me your in-law once he becomes my hubby." Violet was practically frozen with fear from the psychotic girl as Toga pulled back and raised her knife. "What do you say we become BLD sisters? Roman 6? I'll even give us matching scars," she squealed ecstatically and moved the knife down towards Violet. But before it could pierce her skin, the blade struck the ground instead as Violet jerked her head to the side, the blade narrowly missing her head, which she then proceeded to slam strong against Toga's face, bloodying her nose and pushing her off. Violet quickly picked herself up and ran for her life, Toga right behind her and hurling her syringes at her, until she spotted a small river ahead. Thinking fast, she turned invisible again and dove into the water, Toga stopping at the bank and spearing at the water with her syringes, unknowingly missing Violet's invisible form. She giggled at the Par girl's attempt at stealth. "Hiding, are we? Well, you can't get away from me, Tilda, ever." She then grabbed a handful of dirt from the ground and chucked it into the stream. She poised her syringe as she watched the cloud of murk drift through the water until it began to curve around a large invisible mass. "There you are, sis." She grinned as she prepared to skewer the unsuspecting Violet like a fish until she was suddenly struck in the side by a metal boot which sent her tumbling across the ground. Slightly dazed, she looked to see Tenya and Dash had arrived and were now standing before her, the former's mufflers hissing. "You won't be hurting anyone, villain, not while I'm here," the engine hero said gallantly, not noticing a splash behind him showing that Violet had emerged from the water but remained invisible. Toga, on the other hand, had noticed as she smiled. "Oh, is that so, Mr. Knight in shining armor? Well, we'll see just who's hurting who," she taunted before leaping back into the foliage. "Guys," Ida and Dash looked to their left to see Violet come out from behind a tree. "You made it. Thank goodness you're all right." Roman 6. Dash was about to run and hug his sister in relief until... "Stop!" Another Violet came sprinting out of a bush. She then tackled the first Violet, sending both of them rolling across the ground. "Get off of me, you psycho!" One kicked the other in the gut before they both stood and grappled each other. "Oh, come on, not this thing, really?" Dash said, his hands on his head as the two Violets continued to struggle against each other. "You think you can copy me?" "Who's copying? I'm the only Violet Par, you faker." "No, I'm Violet." "I'm Violet." "I'm Violet." "Get her, she's the shapeshifter," they both said in unison at the boys. "How do we know who's who?" I can't risk attack your sister by mistake, Tenya said in distress. Dash, on the other hand, looked like he had an idea. There's only one way to settle this. Hey, Violet, I told Tony the head cheerleader likes him. You what? The right Violet screamed, giving Tenya the sign he needed to attack. He shot towards the pair and delivered a kick towards the left Violet, who released her grip to block his strike, which caused her disguise to drop. It worked, Dash cheered. And I was lying about Tony. He quickly added to his sister. Or was I? Don't push it, twerp. As Toga continued her scuffle against Ida, she turned her attention towards Dash, her eyes narrowing into a glare over him, foiling her plan. With the reflexes of a cat, she dodged Tenya's next attack before grabbing his shoulders and flipping over him, delivering a double kick to his back which propelled her towards Dash. Before the boy could notice her, she slammed her fist into his face, which sent his crashing into a tree, leaving him dazed as Toga prepared to finish him off. I've always hated little brothers, she spat before hurling several knives at him. Violet saw the weapon sail through the air, ready to kill. Before she could think, her body suddenly moved on its own to shield her brother from the oncoming knives, her arms outstretched ready to take the attack head-on. But before the deadly blades could pierce her, a large force field bubble formed around both her and Dash, the knives bouncing harmlessly off it. What? You didn't tell me you could do that? Toga stared at the phenomenon slack-jawed before she charged to attack the bubble with her syringes. Violet felt her instincts take over and move out her hands, which caused a second bubble to form around Toga herself. Tenya saw his chance. Take this, Recipro Burst, he shouted as he unleashed a full-power kick to the trapped Toga, sending her rolling away in her spherical prison, screaming with dizziness. Violet, how'd you do that? Dash asked, looking at his big sister in a rare moment of admiration. I don't know. My body just moved before I had a chance to think, she murmured, recalling Izuku's words of wisdom. It seems you're starting to come into your quirk, Miss Violet. A brilliant display of force field manipulation, Tenya praised. But now that the villains are out of the way, for now at least, you can drop the barrier. No, wait, I have an idea, Dash said. Roman 6, whatever you do, don't stop that bubble, he said as he began to run against the inside of barrier, which caused it to start rolling like a giant hamster ball. It works, nothing can stop us now, he cheered as the siblings rolled off into the jungle. Wait, where are you two going? We need to stay together, Ida spluttered as he hurried after them. I'm going to need so much orange juice after all this running today. As the Parr siblings were quite literally on a roll, however, not too far from them, the group consisting of their parents, Eraserhead, and the accompanying members of 1A were in the process of making their way back towards the hideout to regroup with the other students. They first ran into Shoto and Momo along with Kaminari and Gyro, the four of them roughed up from their fight with Dabai, but otherwise still standing. You actually defeated that psycho? Ojiro asked them after they'd joined up. No. We only stalled him long enough to get away. He'll have melted his way out of the ice by now, and I imagine he'll be rather angry when we next see him, Todoroki reckoned. Regardless, your use of teamwork is what helped you outsmart him. The four of you really came together, so it's good to know that joint training with 1B paid off. Aizawa commended their victory. Hey, everyone. The group looked to the right to see Mina running toward them with Kirishima still on her back, and with her were Katsuki and Koji. Glad to see you made it too. Aizawa looked at Red Riot, who was snoring. Is Kirishima all right? Oh, he's fine. Let's just say, he took a little tumble. Mina chuckled nervously. The quirkless PP in the mask threw raccoon eyes off a cliff, and weird hair broke her fall. Bakugou explained her answer. Bakugou, you're making us look bad. You're the idiots who let the BSTRD get the drop on you. We still beat him in the fight until he played dirty at the last minute with those hidden gadgets. Plus, we found a way around that fancy invisible suit of his. This isn't a test. Surviving is what I asked you kids to do, and you both did, so that's all that matters, Aizawa interjected. Having said that, it looks like I need to start teaching you all more on handling unexpected moves from your opponents, especially stealth-based ones. The man turned his attention back to their objective. Now we just have to find Midoriya, Uraraka, and Ida, as well as the Parr kids. Asui, have you been able to reach either of them? No. I'm just getting static on both their channels. I've completely lost connection with them. You don't think anything happened to them, do you? Koda whimpered. Quit panicking. The stupid extras probably just lost their earpieces. Katsuki wagered. If there's one thing I know about Midoriya, it's that he doesn't go down easy. We'll find them. Aizawa reassured firmly. I hope you're right, Helen prayed. We've only just reunited with Izuku again, and I can't even bear the thought of... Her sentence was suddenly cut off by the sound of distant explosions which made them stop moving. Bakugou? Kirishima asked, awakening in a daze. I'm right here, idiot, he snapped back before he spotted something large, round and purple out of the corner of his eye, barreling towards them. Holy SHT. The group barely had time to back up as the purple ball rolled past them, but not without taking Bob and Helen with it. Elastigirl Tilda, Maita cried out. Monsieur Incredible, Yugo gasped. What was that thing? Another of the villain's weapons? Gyro gawked until a certain class rep came running in the same direction as the ball. Ida for eyes, everyone said at the arrival of Tenya, who skidded to a stop. Mr. Aizawa, everyone, I'm so relieved to see you're all safe. You didn't happen to see the Par children come this way, did you? No, but their parents just got smashed by a huge, glowing purple boulder, Toru replied. Ah, that would happen to have been them, Ida explained awkwardly. Huh? How the hell did they do that? Siro asked. It doesn't matter, let's go. As the heroes moved to catch up with the Pars, the family had rolled several yards away by this point until Violet quickly realized who she and her brother had run over and cancelled out her force field. The family happily reunited with a group hug that was soon cut short by the arrival of more of Syndrome's men and several hovercrafts who the family immediately engaged in combat with. With their combined powers, they were able to make quick work of the grunts, with Dash throwing off their aim by kicking up a sandstorm and Violet blocking their gunfire with her force fields, leaving their parents to take them out. But just as it seemed they were getting the upper hand, Helen began to notice a familiar purple warp gate forming behind her son. Dash, behind you, she cried out, but too late, as a crusty pale hand grabbed the young boy by the shoulder, leaving only one finger off it before Shigaraki stepped through. Don't squirm, I won't be able to keep my pinky steady if you do, he rasped to the struggling preteen. Let go of my son now, Bob roared as he prepared to attack. He'd barely taken a step forward before Shigaraki reached out with his other hand and pressed it against a random guard. The effect was instantaneous as the man screamed in unimaginable pain whilst his body turned a ghostly gray before crumbling to ashes. The grisly death caused Bob to stop dead in his tracks and the other guards to back away in terror. And that was on a fully grown adult. How quicker will it take for my quirk to turn your son's puny body to a pile of rancid dust? The villain grinned as he began to shift his hand away from Dash's shoulder. I could start with his arm. He wouldn't die instantly, but you'd have to cut it off quick to stop the decay. His neck, however. His hand slowly crept closer until it was wrapped around Dash's neck, the boy himself trembling and gasping with fear as Shigaraki stared him straight in his tear-filled eyes with a wide, crazed smile. What do you think, little man? Are you faster than my grip? He queried, his pinky finger wiggling millimeters away from Dash's throat. No, Helen pleaded. Here's what's going to happen. You're gonna stand down and surrender yourselves. Any of you make a move, the kid dies. Get me? Mr. Incredible glared at the villain, a mix of fear and anger on his face before he let himself drop to his knees and placed his hands behind his back, Helen and Violet soon following as the guards went to place shackles on their hands. Okay? You win. Now, let my son go. Shigaraki looked at him before shaking his head. No, you should know better than to trust the word of a villain. Dash! The family screamed as Shigaraki fully enclosed his grip on Dash, but nothing happened. What? The villain was suddenly grabbed from behind by a familiar scarf. Oh, of course it had to be you, Eraserhead. The Erasure hero then proceeded to reel Shigaraki, enforcing him to drop Dash, and as he was pulled back his face was soon met with the fists of both Kirishima and Bakugou. Die! The latter roared as the combined strike and explosion knocked Shigaraki across the clearing before coming to a stop. He got to his feet and glared back at the heroes. This isn't over, he declared as he jumped through a newly formed warp gate from Kirigiri. Whilst Wanna began fighting off the remaining guards, Toru set about freeing the pars from their shackles. "Hi, you must be Violet. I've heard you have the same quirk as me," she said gleefully when she reached the other invisible girl who looked at her in surprise. "You're invisible too?" "Yeah, but I can't turn it off, unlike you, lucky." Toru pouted as she released Violet, who rubbed her wrists. "They're free, Mr. Aizawa." "Good work, Toru," her teacher replied as he and the others finished knocking out the last of the guards. "Now let's find Midoriya and Uraraka and we can—" Whoa, 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 hey, time out! Out of nowhere, Syndrome came flying in, dual-wielding his ZPE lasers, which he used to immobilize the pars and lift them into the air, the 5 of them now hovering above 1A. And he wasn't alone, as flying next to him was none other than Illusion, armed with a new weapon of his own which he was aiming at the other heroes. "Syndrome, Aizawa." "So he's the guy," Kirishima glowered. "Don't move, scum." Illusion PP his firearm. "This blaster's loaded with compressed bombs. Just one will send you all sky high." "Well said, Illusion. So you lot just stay put," Syndrome advised. "Now what have we here? Matching uniforms?" His eyes widened when he recognized Helen. "Oh, no, Elastigirl," he burst out into mocking laughter as he glanced between her and her husband. "You married Elastigirl? Whoa ho 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 tilde." He then noticed the children, which only fueled his glee even further. "Oh, and got busy. It's a whole family of supers. Looks like I've hit the jackpot. Oh, this is just too good," Syndrome cheered. "Honestly, the green-haired kid put a way better fight than you has-beens did." "Deku?" Bakugou responded to the description of his rival. "Yeah, that's what his little girlfriend called him by," Syndrome confirmed without looking at him. "Shame you won't be seeing either of them anymore." Aizawa felt his stomach churning with a sudden feeling of dread. "What?" "Oh, I dropped a landslide on their heads. Watched it bury them alive after I threw them off a cliff." "No." Violet cupped her mouth in shock. "Not Izuku." Helen refused to believe Syndrome's words. "You're lying," Tenya denied vehemently. "There's no way Midoriya and Uraraka could be killed that easily." "Believe what you want, kid." Syndrome looked down on him. "But I still defeated your little friends, and now I've beaten you." "Don't get too comfortable, Syndrome." The man spun around before he was kicked in the gut by a green comet, whilst Illusion was tackled by a pink one, sending both villains falling out of the air and freeing the pars from the ZPE. Midoriya/Deku/Izuku/Uraraka. Everyone cheered at the timely arrival of the missing 2 members of the group. As the villains picked themselves up from the ground, Illusion realized his gun was missing, though he soon found it in the hands of Ochako, who passed it to Mr. Incredible, who effortlessly bent it in half. "First Kirishima and Ishido, and now I hear about the 2 of you falling off a cliff as well as being crushed to death in a landslide. Problem child?" Aizawa asked Izuku, who rubbed the back of his head, embarrassed. "I won't deny it was a close one, sir, but I got us out of it before it could smash us." A topic for another time. Bob stepped in as the group advanced on Syndrome and Illusion, the latter standing defensively in front of his leader. "It's over, Syndrome. You're outnumbered and outmatched. Now tell us how to stop the Omnidroid." The fanboy-turned-villain snarled at his nemesis defiantly. But just when it seemed victory was near for the heroes, a great shadow began to form over the jungle. Everyone looked up and Syndrome grinned at what it was before facing Mr. Incredible with newfound confidence. "It's far from over, Incredible. You forget I'm not alone," he said as Shigaraki descended from above, riding atop the high-end Namu he'd used to destroy Elastigirl's jet from before. At the same time, an enormous warp gate opened up and out of it marched an army of twice clones, with one in particular having a slightly torn and ripped costume. "You're all under arrest. Prepare to die," he said as the rest of the League of Villains joined his side, including Spinner, who still had a few strands of tape and sticky hairballs attached to his body, and Dabai, who could be seen shivering slightly and sneezing. "I've had enough of this back-and-forth bullshit, so I'm only gonna say this once: surrender or die," Shigaraki commanded as the heroes looked at the newly replenished army that now surrounded them. This time, there was no escape. They'd lost. With their ill-gotten surrender at hand, The band of supers were swiftly re-imprisoned in the magnetic field units, a familiar experience for some of them, only this time they had some entertainment during their stay. The entertainment being a large screen displaying a live broadcast of the Omnidroid sitting in the middle of a street in the heart of Metroville. Of course, only Syndrome and the other villains found the sight to be entertaining as the quirkless inventor proudly showed off his sleeping super weapon. Huh? Oh, come on, you gotta admit, this is cool, he insisted before the row of units holding the captive Pars and one of class members who were all glaring back at him. Just like a movie, the robot will emerge dramatically, do some damage, throngs of screaming people, and just when all hope is lost, Syndrome will save the day. I'll be a bigger hero than you ever were, Syndrome declared, the revelation not going unnoticed by Shigaraki and the rest of the league. Hero, the decay villain thought, he and his underlings confused by Syndrome's choice of words. And they weren't the only ones that were baffled by them, as Bob could hardly comprehend it himself. You mean, you killed off real heroes so that you could pretend to be one? He shouted aghast with anger, to which Syndrome turned about and stomped up to him with a glare of his own. Oh, I'm real. Real enough to defeat you. And I did it without your precious gifts, your oh-so-special quirks. He gloated, Izuku watching on with a sad look. Wait, you're quirkless too, Bakugou yelled. I thought only your lackeys were. HM. Nope. I'm just the same as they are. That's exactly why they follow me. And yet I won and you lost. Let that be a lesson for you and your classmates, kid. Syndrome lectured to the shocked/angered/sympathetic faces of the students. All this, just to save a city from a disaster you yourself created for glory? Aizawa questioned, his glare harder than ever at the scale of it all. I'm starting to see the meaning behind your name. But you really are insane if you think that will work. It's not heroics, it's nothing but a ruse. Call it whatever you want, dry eyes, but they won't know any better. Syndrome assured with growing confidence. I'll give them heroics. I'll give them the most spectacular heroics anyone's ever seen. And that's only the beginning. Because after I have had enough of my fun, I'll sell my inventions so that everyone can be superheroes. Everyone can be a super. And when everyone's super. He began to chuckle as he turned away to let his prisoners watch his plan unfold before leaving them with some sinister parting words. No one will be. With a maniacal laugh, the man-child of a villain made his way towards his private jet, where Illusion was waiting in the cockpit, the League of Villains following close behind him with varying expressions of confusion. You never mentioned this to me, Syndrome, Shigaraki said with a hint of underlying distrust. That you intend to destroy your own weapon and be the hero of those people. I was under the impression you were one of us, that you wanted to destroy hero society. Oh, I do, Syndrome insisted. You're just not seeing the big picture, man. You can't change a society by physically destroying it. Even if you burn a city to the ground, the heroes will build it all up again. No, the true way to ensure supers never return is to antiquate them. Make them pass, a dead trend. That way, no one will want to be one anymore. It'll be no more exciting than cleaning toilets. If everyone is given access to the same capabilities as one, the value of being a hero will sink like a rock. Who wants to be something everyone can just buy their way into being? Dabai clarified. Yeah, this guy gets it, Syndrome grinned. It's genius, it'll never work, Twice shouted with his usual flamboyance. Mr. Compress rubbed his chin before taking his turn to speak. There is one thing I'm uncertain of. When you go to save the day, as you put it, won't a hero showing up just as sporadically as the threat itself come across as somewhat suspicious to the public? Good point, Compress, Shigaraki agreed. What's to stop the people from putting 2 and 2 together? To which Syndrome replied. Oh, don't worry about that detail. I have a solution to that as well, you'll see. Shigaraki frowned. This certainly wasn't his way of doing things, and he didn't like being left in the dark on certain details. Why don't you just tell us now? He asked, letting a hint of frustration slip. Look, pal, I've been putting this operation together for over a decade, and you lot have been involved for less than a month. Syndrome shot back with his own patience starting to wear thin. I know I agreed to let you and your gang help out, and believe me, those Yua brats will make perfect toys for the next modification of the droid. But don't think you're the boss of this plan. Shigaraki clenched his fist to suppress the flare of anger he felt. Let him put on his little show. Then I'll decide where we stand. I can always dispose of him if he keeps acting like I'm the one working for him. Or maybe you're the boss." He chirped with a false grin, which Syndrome returned with a satisfied smirk of his own before carrying on towards his jet. The other villains turned to their leader, who gave them the same look he'd given them before they joined the Yakuza. They nodded understandingly as they followed after Syndrome, ready to enact the final phase. Back in the holding cell, the supers continued to view the live footage of the Omnidroid as it emerged from its dormant form, just as Syndrome said, and immediately began attacking the armed forces who'd come to investigate. The military's weapons were powerless against its armored shell, and their tanks were nothing but toys to the killer robot as it easily crushed them under its giant claws or blasted them with its head-mounted laser. The heroes could only helplessly watch the chaos unfold as they hung suspended in their magnetic shackles, though that didn't stop some of them from trying to escape. "Damn it!" Katsuki cursed as he attempted to blow off the cuffs concealing his hands, only for the explosions to be muffled by them. "We gotta get out of here. At this rate, the city's gonna make the Camino site look like pothole." "Kaminari, you got us out of this before. Can't you do it again?" Shoto asked, but the stun gun hero only shook his head. "I don't have enough juice to overload the system. If someone tried shocking us like last time, then I could." "Well, we have to do something. Those people need our help, and nothing they've got can stop that droid," Ochako piped up. "I'm sorry." Bob suddenly spoke, though his words were directed at his family. "This is my fault. I've been a lousy husband and father, blind to what I have. So obsessed with being undervalued that I undervalued all of you." Through his heartfelt apology, he and his wife failed to notice Violet, who'd bubbled a force field around herself which was able to cut off her shackles' connection with the magnetic field. The girl rocked her body back and forth before she began to roll her bubble through the air and out of the containment unit, much to the shock of the one members and Dash, who tried to speak up. Dad? SHH, don't interrupt." Helen scolded him, her attention focused entirely on Bob, who continued to apologize. "I was so caught up in the past that I didn't realize." He paused to bite back a sob as he looked at Helen and Dash with the most sincere gaze he could muster. "You are my greatest adventure. And I almost missed it. I swear I'm gonna get us out of this safely if I—" His speech was quickly cut off by the voice of his daughter, as Violet could now be seen standing next to the control console with a proud, albeit cocky grin on her face. "Well, I think Dad has made some excellent progress today, but I think it's time we wind down now," she quipped before hitting the release button with her cuffed hand, freeing the trapped heroes from the restraints. "That was amazing, Violet," Izuku praised her, he and his classmates crowding around Violet, who quickly grew flustered from the sudden and vast amount of gratitude and compliments she was now receiving. "I never knew you could float things with your force fields," Ochako grinned ecstatically. "Man, I am so jelly of you, girl." Toru waved her gloved hands wildly. "On and off invisibility and force fields? I wish I could do that." "Well, you can manipulate light, Toru. And from what I can tell, Par's force fields are likely composed from solid light constructs. You might be able to do the same thing," Momo theorized. "You think?" "It is a possibility." Aizawa agreed with Momo's theory as he approached the group. Though considering she's had to hide her quirk under law for practically her entire life, it's astonishing she's become this versatile with it in such a short amount of time. "I'm impressed, Par." "Whoa. It's rare to see Mr. Aizawa compliment someone," Kirishima muttered. Thank you, sir," Violet replied bashfully. The rest of her family looked on at the scene unfolding, brimming with pride themselves. "She fits right in with them, don't you think?" Bob smiled as he watched Violet smiling and laughing amongst the WANA members. "I won't deny they've taken a liking to her," Helen replied. "But she can make friends with them later." "You're right. Let's move, people. We've got a 7-story robot to take down." "We're doomed," Minta whined as the group left the cell. "We need to get back to the mainland," said Bob as they ran down the hallways. "We'll try the air hangar we passed through earlier." "Well, let's hope it still has any crafts left. Compress may have destroyed them all," Shoji doubtfully mentioned. "No. They would need a craft to leave the island themselves, so he would have kept at least a few intact," Helen reassured. Well, here's hoping, Bob said as they reached a locked door. We got this, Sato. Kirishima beckoned Sugarman over as the two strong heroes rammed into the door and knocked it down like it was nothing. The group found themselves back in the air hangar, which had been cleared of the wrecked jets, leaving only a single RV in its empty space. Well, that's disappointing, Gyro muttered. Perfect. Let's go on a road trip when this is over. Katsuki glared at the puny vehicle. But as they approached it, they heard the sounds of laughter and cheering coming from inside. Shoji extended one of his eyes out to peer through the window to see it was filled with about 10 guards who were watching the Omnidroid's live rampage, whooping at the destruction it was causing as they drank to their near victory. Okay, look. Hey, every time they run, you take a shot. Yeah, okay? Cocky BSTRD, think they've won? Aizawa glared, loosening his scarf as he approached the door. Upon opening it, he raised his hand to catch a cork that flew at him from the bottle of champagne one of the guards had popped. They froze when they saw his red eyes as he shut the door, followed by the sound of aggressive beating and muffled screams of pain before the door reopened and their unconscious bodies were kicked out. Aizawa dusting his hands. Area's clear, let's move, he said before the group kept searching the hangar. This is the right one, but I don't see any jets. Ribbit. I knew that Mad Magician wrecked them all and Syndrome must have taken the last one. Sue croaked frustratingly. A jet's not fast enough anyway, said Bob. Well, what's faster than a jet? Helen asked. Hey, how about a rocket? Heads turned to see Dash standing in another hangar which contained a second rocket, identical to the one the Omnidroid was launched on. Great, I can't fly a rocket, Helen muttered. You don't have to. Use the coordinates from the last launch, Violet suggested. Brilliant, a genius idea, Miss Parr. Ida praised with a proud wave of his arms, but before they could put their new plan of escape into action, Bob suddenly remembered. Ah, wait. I bet Syndrome's changed the password by now. How do we get into his computer? Say please. The group looked up at the viewing wing overlooking the hangar to see none other than Mirage smiling at them. It seemed the heroes had a newfound ally on the inside. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for upcoming news stories and adaptations. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Yellow Pikmin 88 on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.